for Robin in that his eyesight is improving. The retina is laying down very, very slowly. So I had some reports from the lady that, I can't remember her name, just having an age moment. Anyway, the lady that was here earlier, she said, at long last, the retina is laying down and he's beginning to look less worried. He's beginning to look as if things are actually settling down. So thank you, Father. I'm going to tell you some stories today. So for the internet, you are going to be treated to a few true stories, and then we're going to have a look at Esther. The first story is my story. It's a layer of my story. I love films. I particularly love thrillers. Yep, thrillers. Thrillers, action movies, those sort of movies. And over the years, I know that it's a sort of a link back to when I was a teenager. My dear dad, bless him, he was not very good at communicating. He was illiterate. He dropped out of school at the age of 14. He tried to do various jobs and it didn't work. He ended up being a warehouseman for most of his life because he wasn't very well educated. But my mum was extremely well educated. So you can imagine the tension that caused. Anyway, getting back to the story. One of the ways my dad would spend quality time in his eyes with me was we would sit and watch films. Loads of war films, westerns, thrillers. You know, my mum and dad were very religious, and yet we would watch Dracula and all sorts of ridiculous things that you wouldn't expect Christian families to watch. So, do I love Christian films? No, I do not. I do not love Christian films. That may be a bit of a shock to you. I love everything about Hollywood and everything, the action that is in it. So when people tell me, oh, there's this fantastic Christian film out, you must go and watch it, I can tell you, I will avoid it like the plague. Over the years, God has used films to speak to me. The most unlikely film, one of the most sort of violent films, Shawshank Redemption, God spoke to me about hope. I won't go into the details because that's a particular part of another part of my story. But it's interesting how Christian films really turn me off. So, God bless my son, he allows us a profile on Netflix. So we can watch his Netflix on our computer. I mean, he's 5,000 miles away. How is that possible? And every now and again, up on the Netflix banner comes a Christian film. And of course, I avoid it. There's a particular one that keeps coming back, and I keep seeing it. It's called God's Not Dead, Light in the Darkness. And I was determined that I would not watch this film until last night. Last night, I sat watching God's Not Dead, Light in the Darkness. Those of you that have watched it will know it's about a church and a pastor. A pastor who has an anger streak. Now I wonder, is there any pastor that has an anger streak in them? I don't know any pastor in this church that has an anger streak. So, Thelma and I, some months back, had a conversation. Do you remember that I said to you that sometimes I can be really, really nasty? And you didn't believe me. Yep. So there's a story that the rest of the congregation know that you don't know. that I have to confess. So I play for an over-60s soccer team called South Okanagan United. And they know I'm a pastor. And a few weeks back, in the first half, never mind the second half, the first half, someone comes up behind me and pushes me over, and I hit another guy and then knock him to the ground. What do? Get up and bless him? Oh no. I get up and I give the other guy a big push. And I get sent off. I get a red card. The reason why I'm telling you this again is because another layer of that story came out this week. As I was sitting with some of my soccer colleagues, two of the players told me, do you know, Steve, we actually spoke to the referee after the game. We told the referee that this was so out of character for you. We didn't know what happened. And I said, well, I know what happened. Anger is what happened. Anger came up in me, and I just let it out. And they said, no, it's so out of character. Anyway, let's get back to stories. Another story. Our kids have worked in pubs in Bristol in the UK. Currently, Lawrence, my son, is acting manager. And the reason is because something happened between certain members of the staff, and so he had to step in and was asked to step in. And he is one of those sort of followers of Jesus that is very much like me. I bury my light under a bowl. I do not have a light that shines very brightly. My light is very much buried, as you see from my soccer game. So he's been managing the pub in absence of other staff. And the pub is going through a very, very difficult time. They're losing staff. There's lots of tension. And we are praying for him back here in Canada. And he knows it. And then he says, this last week, he said, I was really surprised when some of my colleagues came and asked for prayer. His light may have been under a bowl, but clearly it must have shone at some stage. Why am I telling you this? There is a story in the Bible, in the book of Esther. It's a story of a woman who has hidden her light under a bowl. And to give you the sort of the lead up to what happens, there's this particular king in Persia who is married to a lady called Vashti, and he wants her to parade herself in front of all of the men of the kingdom. And Vashti refuses, and so she's banished. And so the king has another beauty pageant. The foster father of Esther says to Esther, hey, you ought to enter this. You are very beautiful. Why don't you put yourself? Now, I think most women would go, I don't want to be known for my beauty. I want to be known for my brains. I know a couple of women, one particular one, that would be more interested in being known for her brains and her beauty. I can't tell you who that might be. You might have to guess. So here is Esther being encouraged to enter the beauty pageant. She decides to humble herself to what goes on, and she wins the beauty pageant and becomes the king's new queen. She has learnt some stuff over the years. One of those things she's learnt is she's really good at cooking. And so she's not just beautiful and smart, she cooks well. So Going on with the story, the king, being a smart king, has this sort of underling, I can't think of a better way, perhaps a second in command, or someone who he decides he's going to give some of his authority to. The trouble is that with this guy, authority brings power, and power is not a good thing in this person's hands. And he's starting to use it in the wrong way for the wrong things. But because Esther's stepfather is wanting to encourage Esther to be a light that shines, he keeps on just giving her little words of encouragement. Try this, try this, try this. So I'm going to read to you from Esther 4. Because it's a sort of, it takes the story from when Haman is trying to manipulate things in the king's palace and trying to get all the all the Jews killed. I'm having an Emmerich moment. Mordecai wants to find a way of Esther using her position to save the Jews. So when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square in the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. So now you can tell how far Haman would go to make sure the Jews would be killed off. He put this great amount of money. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to urge her to go into the king's presence, to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Now, one of the reasons that she didn't want to plead with the king for the Jews was because she'd never told the king that she was a Jew herself. This was the light that she had hidden under the bowl. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all Esther's instructions. She actually does go to the king, and she asks that a favor be granted to her. And she explains eventually that she is a Jew, and so this has ramifications for her. The key verse in this story comes at verse 14. "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this?" Each of us are where we are at for such a time as this. Lawrence is working in the pub in Bristol, and he was given the management of the pub for such a time as this, when it was crucial that the company would know that someone was loyal and would stand for the right of the company and for the right of the employees. Each of us are in our place for such a time as this. John in Peachland, Thelma in Peachland up the hill, Mike coming and helping us lead worship, Brittany come and sit in at the back, Lee working on her map, prepared for such a time as this if children come, Emmerich supporting us as we minister here, Marie for such a time as this, Pat as she goes off to spend time with her family is going for such a time as this, Carol being here in Peachland, even though you don't want to be here, for such a time as this. Marie, with your dizzy spells, we don't know why, yet for such a time as this. Bobby, without a voice, for such a time as this. Kate and I, here, in this place, for such a time as this. What is that time? It is a time when the Christian faith is being attacked around the world. Who would believe that Canada would be a place where the Christian faith would come under attack? The same in the UK. Who would believe that what used to be a Christian country is no longer a Christian country? So there are people around the world that have been given authority and power for such a time as this. Are you willing to let your light shine, to take the bowl off the light? Am I willing to let the bowl be taken off the light? I'm asking myself the same question. Am I willing to stand up for Jesus? Am I willing to stand and be counted? So I'm just going to pray. Father, everything that you had me write in relation to this story I didn't say, but you had lots of words that you wanted to say, and I hope that they came out. You have brought us to this place for such a time as this. Each of us has a light that needs to shine. Each of us has authority in different spheres that needs to be spoken out. Help us to follow after where you are preparing us, where you are leading us. Help us to go where you are leading us, to speak, to do what you're calling us to do, to stand in the gap for the weak, the vulnerable, the voiceless. Thank you, Father, for such a time as this.